Have you noticed that there are some people that you just do not want to watch a movie with, no matter what? The loud popcorn eater who seems to only crunch the kernels the entire time. The person who asks questions through the whole movie and misses the answers that the movie's trying to give them because they're asking more questions. The person who just cannot stay seated and starts to putter around the living room. The person who's on their phone the whole time. Maybe the person that annoys you the most is the person who spends the movie trying to connect all of the actors with their previous roles in different movies with other actors. How about the person who complains about the job that the sound or the lighting designer did and how they could have done it better? The person who laughs way too loud at all of the wrong times. Or the one who quotes the entire movie as it's happening. My personal favorite is the person who tells you everything that's about to happen while you're watching the movie before it can happen, so that you don't actually get to experience the movie, you just get to experience their commentary on the movie. Whew, yikes. Unfortunately, if I'm honest, I'm one of those people. I mean, I'm not one of those people. I'm a different kind of annoying. I'm the guy who won't let you start the movie before giving you the proper background and the history of the story up to this point, because really you need to understand the context and the depth of the book series that this movie was, lightly based on, in order for you to properly understand and appreciate the world building of the author, right? In other words, I'm the guy that you don't want to watch The Lord of the Rings with for the very first time. It is an odd and I admit probably pretty annoying quirk of mine. In fact, when the DVDs of The Lord of the Rings came out for the very first time, I remember sitting down with 4 or 5 people who had never seen the movies before. They had never read the books. They didn't know anything about the story. And when we got everything situated just right, the lights in the room were dimmed to the proper level, the sound system was properly aligned and cranked. Everybody had gone to the bathroom, everybody had their favorite snack, non-crunchy snack, of course. And just before I pressed play, I had this impossible to resist urge to fill them in on just a bit of the backstory, not all of it, not any of the Lost Tales or the Children of Hurin or the Lays of Beleriand or Luthien, or even all of the Silmarillion. Just enough of the backstory, the history, the context that you need in order to understand and appreciate what you're about to experience for the very first time. Now, I realize that can be a bit much for most people, but I would argue that it's not actually a personality defect. It's actually the fingerprints of God on my personality. Now, not only do you see God's handiwork throughout history, but there seems to be this constant nudge by God to look back and to see how all of these things, everything really, connects to the past, while it's also pointing us towards the future. As if this human story wasn't just happening by random chance or accident, but there may be threads of meaning and purpose and design that run through the entire tale that's being woven throughout time. And if you spend much time reading scripture and you're paying attention while you do it, you will see hints and nods to those threads that were laid down years or centuries or even sometimes millennia beforehand. Things that connect and enhance everything while bringing a deeper meaning to all of it. And Christmas is not only a part of this, but it's also one of the major reasons for all of it. You'll see it when you open up each of the 4 stories of Jesus' life. We in the Christian world call them the Gospels, which basically just means good news. Matthew, when he starts his account of Jesus' life, he starts it with Jesus' genealogy, all of Jesus' ancestors. Mark kicks off his telling of Jesus' life by taking us into the wilderness with Jesus' cousin, John the Baptist, who was preaching at that time about the one who would come to save the world. The Apostle John, his first few verses are these deep theological truths that set the stage for the life of Jesus that he's about to talk to us about. But Luke, my personal favorite of the four Gospels, Luke starts his off not with the story of Jesus, but with the story of Elizabeth and Zechariah. Now, not many nativity sets come with these two characters. You got to really go out and find the premium deluxe set to get these two, even though they are prime characters in Luke's telling of this story. In fact, their story makes up the majority of the 80 verses in Luke's opening chapter of Jesus' life. And they're great characters. Characters who show us the birth of Jesus. It wasn't just some random thing that God decided to do willy-nilly. It was planned. It was orchestrated far, far in advance. In fact, in the letter that Paul writes to the Galatians, Paul tells them that when the fullness of time had come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, in order to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as children. And Elizabeth and Zechariah's story is a part of that planning and that building towards the future that God is so good at. Because when we're introduced to this couple, Luke tells us that they were way past the age of having children, right? Which, according to the wisdom of that age, would put them at least 60, if not far beyond that, which, unlike today, was quite old back then. And yet they hadn't been able to have children. They had prayed, they had fasted, and yet their cries to God had been echoed back to them with silence. In our world, this would mean multiple trips to doctors who specialize in reproduction. It would mean medications and treatments and conversations with your spouse about just how much money you could afford to spend. And all of the options that are on the table nowadays, which are absolute miracles of science. But for these two elderly Jews 2 millennia ago, there were no options aside from prayer and fasting. And if those didn't work, the rule of thumb said that there was something wrong with you, or both of you as a couple. It was seen as God's punishment for some kind of sin that you may not even be aware of, and it would come with the shame and the not so secretive whispers of everybody who knew you, along with your own confusion and grief and frustration. It would mean that there would be no little feet to run through your house and to make messes, no little voice to giggle, and no cries to keep you up at night. There would be no one there to take care of you when you got older, no one to carry on your family traditions or your family line when you were gone. But that didn't mean that Zechariah and Elizabeth gave up on God or lived lives that were depressed and bitter. Luke tells us actually that they lived righteous lives and served God blamelessly, which meant the very first readers of this account that Luke put down would have been pretty confused as to why they were unable to have children. Like, you literally just said they were blameless and they still can't have children. In verse 8, Luke tells us that Zechariah was a priest at the temple of God in Jerusalem when he was chosen at random using dice or Purim, right? Call back to the story of Esther. He was chosen by the roll of the dice to be the priest who would go into the temple to offer the burning of the incense. Now, this wasn't just something that anybody could do. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for him that would allow him into the holiest place in the temple that somebody of his priestly position could ever hope to go. Granted, it was a pretty simple task, but it held so much history and meaning and honor that it would have been one of the highlights of his life, something he'd been looking forward to forever. And there were all kinds of protocols that he would have had to do and rituals of cleanliness that he would have had to perform before being even allowed to walk into that holy space, that space that he had only imagined before this moment. Chapter 1, verse 10 sets the stage for us. And the whole multitude of people were in prayer outside at the hour of the incense burning. And there we have Zechariah, this old man for his time, slowly walking into that holy place, looking around at the walls and the ceiling and the incense altar for the very first time with all of these people outside praying. I would imagine that he was a bit nervous. You could probably hear all of the people outside praying. Probably, at least I would be nervous that I'd screw something up when I was in there for the one time. But I think that the bigger worry in the back of Zechariah's head would have been the weight that he had been carrying around for the last 40 or 50 years. For some reason, God hadn't allowed him to have children. What if there was some sin that he didn't know about? What if that sin that he didn't even know about was going to be highly offensive to God? What if the holiness of God killed him because of this sinful state? It's not like that hadn't happened before to other priests. There would have been some serious nerves. And he walks in, and that's when it happened. An angel of God appears out of nowhere, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. And I don't think I need to tell you what Zechariah's reaction was. Here it is in verse 12. Zechariah was troubled, terrified when he saw the angel, and fear gripped him. It overwhelmed him. And whether you know it or not, the default reaction of people who see angels in the Bible, terror, panic, wet your pants, tremble in your boots kind of terror, right? He knew it. Whatever had kept him and Elizabeth from having children was going to mean his death inside that temple. It was over. Hopefully, it wasn't going to be too painful. But just like the default reaction of people at seeing an angel was terror, the default first sentence of angels was this, verse 13. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, for your petition has been heard. You and your wife Elizabeth will bear a son, and you will give him the name John. You will have joy and gladness, and many people will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord, and he will drink no wine or no liquor. He will be filled with the Holy Spirit while yet in his mother's womb, and he will turn many of the sons of Israel back to the Lord their God. It is he who will go as a forerunner before him in the spirit and power of Elijah. He will turn the hearts of the fathers back to their children, and the disobedient to the attitude of the righteous, so as to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." The mix of emotions that Zechariah must have been feeling at that moment would have been tremendous. Can you imagine going from that place, knowing that you were staring at the angel of death right in the face, to being told that your greatest dream was about to be fulfilled in a way that was beyond your wildest dreams? That would have been quite the whiplash. Not only was he being told that they were going to have a son, but this child was going to be a powerful man of God, a man who would play a legendary role in the coming of the Messiah. He would help fulfill the prophecies of the ancient prophets, things that Zechariah had been taught and read and learned about his entire life. Now, when we read the words of this angel, most of us don't notice that he quotes the prophet Malachi. But Zechariah would absolutely have noticed. He was a priest and therefore would have had much of the Old Testament memorized. So when the angel is speaking to Zechariah, he would have immediately had Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6 pop into his head. And it would have blown him away because it was a prophecy that he got to take part in. I will send you the prophet Elijah before the great and terrible day of the Lord. He will turn the hearts of parents to their children and the hearts of children to their parents. Hearing that, it would have been like, oh my gosh, I get to play a role in this. My son, how could this be happening? They had tried to have children. They had prayed to God. They had fasted. They had been obedient and worshipful and done everything right. And yet they'd been met with silence. Maybe this angel had the wrong guy. Maybe he thought that Zechariah was some other priest, one of the other priests that didn't get chosen that day. Maybe the angel had heard wrong. Didn't he see how old he was? Verse 18, Zechariah said to the angel, "How will I know this for certain? For I'm an old man and my wife is getting advanced in years." Good call there. Obviously there had been some mistake. Verse 19, the angel answered and said to him, "I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and bring you this good news." Can you imagine how intense that response would have been? I know for us it's just words on a page, but think about what that would have been like to be standing inside of the temple of God in front of the incense altar, something that you've only ever dreamt about. And now you're speaking to Gabriel, an angel who stands in the presence of God. And then, as if in answer to Zechariah's question of how am I going to know this is actually going to happen, Gabriel tells Zechariah this. Here's verse 20. "Behold, you shall be silent and unable to speak until the day when these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their proper time." Oops. Well then, okay. And while this is all happening inside the temple, outside the temple, everybody is waiting and wondering what in the world is taking this guy so long. Did he drop the lighter? Did he knock over the incense? Did God kill him? What is happening in there? And then Zechariah finally walks out. I'm assuming in some sort of daze. And they quickly notice this guy can't speak. He is completely mute. And he starts motioning and giving them hand signals like some kind of bad game of charades. And they realize something profound happened inside of that temple. He must have had some kind of encounter with God, some kind of vision or something. This was strange. And I assume that he goes home and tries to explain everything to Elizabeth. And we don't know exactly how that went, but apparently it went pretty well because she becomes pregnant. And at long last, their dream was finally going to come true. Despite all of the odds that were stacked against them, everything that had gone wrong up to that point, the whispers and the looks that she had lived with for decades, would no longer be because of her disgrace, but because of God's blessing. Their house probably was a little quiet, don't you think? Zechariah obviously wasn't talking, and I'd guess that Elizabeth was probably in constant, deep thought as she went about her daily tasks and began to prepare the nursery and the rest of their home for the arrival of this baby, right? A quiet home. So when Mary shows up, 6 months into Elizabeth's pregnancy, it may have come as a bit of a nice reprieve from the constant silence. Especially when Elizabeth's baby leapt in her belly at Mary's voice, right? As Mary calls out a greeting as she's approaching their house, somehow Luke tells us that it was this Holy Spirit experience, but we're not exactly sure what that means. But Elizabeth knows instantly that Mary's pregnant with the Messiah. They must have exchanged stories and laughed together and spoke about what this would mean for them and their families and the entire nation of Israel as Mary stayed with them for a couple of months. And when it came time for Elizabeth to finally give birth, the entire town rejoices with them. It was this momentous occasion. There was so much drama and mystery surrounding this couple and this pregnancy that when the time came for him to be born and then 8 days later to be circumcised at the temple, everybody was there. And they were all anticipating and expecting that Elizabeth would name him after his father, Zechariah, which was kind of the custom of the time. But Elizabeth says, no, he's going to be named John. Here's the account that Luke gives us, starting in verse 61. And they said to her, there's no one among your relatives who's named John. And they made signs to his father as to what he wanted him to be called. And he asked for a tablet, and he wrote as follows, his name is John. And they were all astonished. And at once his mouth was opened, and his tongue was loosed. And he began to speak in praise of God. Fear came upon all of those living around them. And all of these matters were talked about in all of the hill country of Judea. All who heard them kept them in mind, saying, what will this child turn out to be? For the hand of the Lord was certainly with him. Just like Gabriel had told him, Zechariah was able to talk as soon as he said, what would happen, would happen. And what was it that Zechariah said? What were the first things out of his mouth after months of not being able to speak? This is what we're told he said. Blessed be the Lord, God of Israel, for he has visited us and accomplished redemption for his people. And he has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of David, his servant, as he spoke by the mouth of his holy prophets from of old, salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us, to show mercy toward our fathers and to remember his holy covenant. The oath which he swore to Abraham our father, to grant us that we, being rescued from the hand of our enemies, might serve him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all of our days. And you, child, will be called the prophet of the Most High, for you will go on before the Lord to prepare his ways, to give to his people the knowledge of salvation by the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God, with which the sunrise from on high will visit us, to shine upon those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. Beautiful. Something that I would imagine that Zechariah had been thinking about for months. You see, these are the opening scenes of the story of Jesus. And there's no mention of Jesus. Luke knows that background matters. The context of what's happening matters. All of the things that are going on behind the scenes to help build the world that God is working in. Luke spends time reminding us that the arrival of Jesus wasn't just this random act. It wasn't accident or chance. And your story isn't any different. Even though we're not the hero of this story, because, let's be honest, that role can only belong to God. But we do get to be among the supporting characters. And all of the little things that you've walked through in your life, all of the things that have helped to shape you and to make you into the person that you are right now. Those things aren't so small that God isn't paying attention to them. In fact, I believe that God works in and through all of that. And when we allow God to make those things beautiful, when we allow him to show up and work in and through those things, that can help to bring us into a position where we get to become the people that God designed us to be. We get to be a part of the incredible things that happen in this world that God has been planning and designing for years, centuries, millennia. We get to be a part of God's ultimate story of transformation and redemption and restoration that can be beautiful and life-changing and world-changing. These partnerships, when we allow them to be, can be a part of God's story like we've never seen. And my prayer for us as we continue in this season of Advent is that you will remember that it's not just the arrival of Jesus that is a big deal, but it's all of the things that are going on around that arrival of Christ, and that you get to participate in that even today. It wasn't something that just happened 2,000 years ago. It wasn't something that was just prepared for 3 and 4 and 5,000 years ago, but it's actually happening now. The arrival of the Christ child happens now, and you get to be a part of that in the lives of those people that God has placed you around.